So, welcome to Tara Institute. Thank you for coming out Easter Monday. Easter Monday is always a difficult time for people. Often they're away or doing different things. So, thank you very much for coming tonight. And so my name's Damien, and I'm leading this month's Monday nights. And just thinking before tonight, before the thing, partly a thought that also occurred for me during COVID, something that the COVID lockdowns, I'd say the last 2 years, with the centre being closed and teaching's pretty much stopped the whole time, except for a few online classes. And that thought, why am I here? Why does anybody come here? What do we come for? What is it that triggers us to come? What are we looking for? What are we looking for with Buddhism, or even with meditation, with somebody sitting here just talking? What is it that we're looking for? What am I looking for? And so last 2 weeks I talked about, in a way, going back to the Buddha. We're back to the beginning, to the Buddha, to the Buddha himself faced this same issue. So the story goes that the Buddha spent his whole life let's say it's worth recapping the Buddha's life a little bit. So Buddha was born into a royal family. He was had an arranged marriage to a beautiful princess, and they had children, destined to be the king, and his father protected him. There were some prophecies that he would become either a holy man or a great king. So the father was determined to make sure that he became a great king, and so he protected him in the kingdom from seeing difficult circumstances or anything that might trigger him to become a holy person rather than a king. But the Buddha happened to see, a sick person, a dead person, saw suffering, and then he also saw a holy person, a meditator, a wandering meditator, and then decided to leave the kingdom and enter a path looking for an answer. But an answer to what is always the question. What is the question that we're looking for an answer? So, and it's something we all have to address. What is the, I'm looking for an answer, but I haven't found the question, So, what's the question to which I'm looking for an answer? So, I guess the Buddhists give us that story to say that what the Buddha, in the way that the story is told, and the story is told that it's about why are some people poor and in terrible suffering? Why is somebody sick and in terrible suffering? Why does somebody die and have terrible suffering? So these were the sort of the superficial questions, but really the questions we have are questions about everything in life. Why do I suffer with relations? Why do I suffer with relationships? Why do I suffer without relationships? Why do I suffer with achieving something? Why do I suffer without achieving something? Like the loss, the gain, always seems to be problematic. And so when the Buddha then spent, many years seeking these answers and followed every available teacher in India at the time. He went to many, many different teachers, and he would stay with them for a period of time till he felt that he had learnt everything he could off that teacher, and then he'd get to a point where he thought, this teacher is not offering me more of an answer, so then would go to another renowned teacher and would try to get more wisdom, more answers. Anyway, so he did this for quite a few years, and then was engaged in, traditional, very ascetic meditations with his friends at the time, but then thought that it was that super ascetic path was unproductive. It was unproductive, and so he abandoned that ascetic path and then took normal food instead of he was basically in starvation, with this idea of abandoning the faults of the body, but then engaged in taking normal food, and then with that extra strength and that he then sat down and so supposedly achieved enlightenment on a particular day, right? So overnight, and then with the rising of the sun in the morning, he then sort of had realised enlightenment, whatever that was, So, but what happened then was that the Buddha realised nobody would believe him. If he thought, who can I teach? What I've realised, who can I teach? Nobody will accept what I'm saying. And after a period of time contemplating what he had realised, then he basically realised that his 5 friends that he'd spent years doing the ascetic meditation with were possibly the one small group of people that could understand what he had realised. So he sought them out. He walked from Bodh Gaya to Varanasi to meet up with them, and then he gave them a teaching about what he'd realised. And initially they weren't very impressed because they felt he had abandoned the true path, because he'd abandoned this ascetic path. And to some degree in India you can still see people following these really ascetic paths. There's still yogis doing this in India now. So he then taught them, and the thing that he taught them is called the Four Noble Truths. So the last few weeks I've been talking mainly about the first truth, which we normally say is the truth of suffering. But some people prefer to translate the word, whatever, I think it's dukkha in Pali. They translate that word not so much as suffering, but dissatisfactoriness. And I've been talking about what that term dissatisfactoriness means, and how, I think there's a little bit, they're both, let's say they're both true. Truth of suffering and the truth of dissatisfactoriness, they're both renderings of the meaning. And so for us, with any of these terms in English, enlightenment, for instance, as a term, we have to understand what the concept is and then recognise that we are just attaching the word enlightenment to that meaning. So the trouble with language is that we think that the word has a definitive meaning, and so when we use the word to describe a particular thought or a particular meaning, we take this definitive meaning of the word and try to fit the subject to that definitive meaning. So in Buddhism, particularly where English words are used to describe different things, we have to be very careful that we're taking an English word with a sort of a set dictionary meaning, and then we're trying to apply it to an idea or a thought, and we get a distorted view of that actual thought. Now, so even a word like meditation, it has a definitive meaning from a dictionary, but in the context here, maybe it's got a slightly broader or a more fine-tuned meaning, and so we have to be a little bit cautious of that process. So a term like refuge, like I did the prayer, I go for refuge. So the word refuge has a sort of a certain meaning in English, but here I'm using that word for another concept. I go for refuge, and to understand so this is just general advice when you hear these terms. Peace, what does peace mean? What's calm? The mind, consciousness, conceptualization, all these sort of things that are normal English words, but they have very specific meanings. So anyway, I can see I'm getting a bit sidetracked. So suffering, the truth of suffering. And so it's worthwhile to also think that the meaning is the truth of dissatisfactoriness. And in our lives, we can check to see if some of this is true or not. But the point of the Four Noble Truths is that the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth that suffering has a cessation, that cessation of suffering is possible, and the truth that there is a pathway of action that can lead to the cessation of suffering. So those four truths. But the trouble is, they're not truths for me. They're not truths for me as an ordinary person. They are truths to a noble person. That's why they're called the Four Noble Truths, because they are truths for a noble person. And a noble person means somebody who has a high level of meditational experience, of directly perceiving reality. And so for that person who's had that level of perception, these things are true. But for me as an ordinary person, where my mind is still deceived by appearances or deceived by my emotions and my prejudices and my delusions, for me as an ordinary person, they're not sort of embody for me a truth. Okay, so that's something to understand, and that's what we're trying to do, is trying to understand how is it that this dissatisfactoriness, how is that a truth? And so we can put in some effort and some thinking and look at our life and read what the Buddha said and read what their various lamas are teaching us about this, and so then we can get some inkling as to what this means. So, the truth of dissatisfactoriness. And then, that's simple things like, from the moment we're born, we're hurtling towards death. Every moment of my existence means that I'm just one more moment closer to death, and that the progression of my life is that aging and sickness are definites. They're certain to happen, and that death, the coming on of death, and that everything that I have possessed is left behind. All of the friends, my family, everything is abandoned in the moment of death. So these are sort of, unsatisfactory elements of our life. And this truth of dissatisfactoriness, so there's various descriptions of this in terms of a human that, I wish for happiness. And so, like I've said also, that I have an innate wish for happiness. I have an innate wish for happiness, and I have an innate wish to be free from suffering. So, and these things motivate my daily life. They motivate my daily life I would say we can make the argument that everything I do, whether I scratch my knee, like there I scratch my knee, to relieve some suffering. To have the happiness of that scratch. But the element of dissatisfactoriness is that I think that that's happiness, but if I keep scratching, it becomes annoying. And that everything in my life is like that. Whatever I think, I keep doing it. Oh, this is so annoying, it's boring me now. You can see that it doesn't matter what it is in life, there's just this element of underlying dissatisfactoriness with everything. And even within that, I can accept that. I can accept, okay, if I keep doing this, it's really dissatisfactory. And it's not pleasant. But I had the wish to be happy, which caused me to do it, and then I have the wish to be happy to stop me doing it. And we enter relationships, jobs, where we live, what we do, what we eat, everything. We enter it with this wish to be happy and the wish to be free from suffering, but we then suffer this problem of dissatisfactoriness. And so what I've in my own thinking, particularly the last 2 years, in terms of Dharma, so like Dharma is the word used for, let's say an English equivalent is religious knowledge, right? Or the knowledge of what is beneficial and the knowledge of what is harmful, and the knowledge of how to practice engaging in the beneficial and abandoning the harmful. We can say that is the Dharma. So during COVID, the superficial Dharma, which was classes here every week, three classes a week, time spent with my teacher, preparing for courses or this or that study, that was all gone. To some degree, that was all ceased. And so then you're faced with the thing of, all right, well, what exactly am I doing? Exactly what is it that I'm doing? How can I sort of find a really definite reason? Like where is my certainty in what I'm doing? And like, say, for coming here tonight, like if we're looking for certainty, I think it's quite hard for us to find something really concretely certain. I'm just alluding to this idea that I come here and talk about the Dharma, but when I leave tonight, have I created something concrete, or is it just, is it something minuscule? There's sort of like this, it's just a perplexing thought for me as to the definitiveness of our actions, they've really... And I guess the conclusion that I've come to is that we are looking at such tiny steps all the time. We're looking at very tiny steps of having a little bit of insight, a little bit of mental peace, some clarity, and we can't really see how that clarity fits into a bigger picture, but that there is a trust in the process, even though we can't see like really concrete, definite progress. So I guess what I'm trying to sort of come to that point is for us to have a belief there is this pervasive dissatisfactoriness. And it's very hard to see how anything much can be of real benefit within this sphere of dissatisfactoriness. And so to find some trust in a process that is addressing this issue maybe in a very really small step-by-step increments. And so, the Dalai Lama makes the point, if you start doing meditation and you're focusing on the breath or doing meditation, reading books and looking to identify your own delusions and overcoming your own delusions, and then you sort of engage in this and then you're looking for progress. But he says, don't look straight away. He said, after 5 years, after 10 years, look back and see what progress you've made. Have a look at your personality from 10 years ago to your personality today, and then you can sort of say, well, gee, looks like I've made some progress. But it's not like walking in here, sitting for half an hour and walking out and everything is solved. Because that, if you have that thought that that'll be the process, then it'll just be another element of your dissatisfaction in life, because it cannot work like that. And so, I guess tonight in particular, I just wanted to talk about that element, for you as attendees to try to understand that this process of understanding the truth of suffering and the cause of suffering, and then sort of working towards cessation, like is cessation possible, and then thinking that there's a path that can lead me to overcome my own causes for the suffering that I experience, like that, to complete that circle, this is the problem. The problem is to be understood. The problem is to be recognised. The truth of suffering is to be recognised. The causes are to be understood. Cessation is to be realised, and the path is to be practised. So to be able to think of those four things like that, then, but here, I'm sitting here, okay, so where does this all fit in what I can say tonight to address this issue? Again, this is what I'm trying to convey, is that there is no straightforward blockbuster answer to this truth of unsatisfactoriness for us. So to encourage you to think in terms of a hopefully a lifelong, step by step, even if they're very small steps, process of recognising the truth of suffering, recognising the dissatisfactoriness of life, understanding that dissatisfactoriness actually comes from causes, and the two causes are our previous action. So the previous actions have given me this body. This body is the result of my previous actions. And a lot of the circumstances in my life are also the result of previous action. Good things and not so good things have come about because of my previous actions. And then the more immediate thing is my own mental state, the delusions in my mind. So my prejudices and my anger, my pride, my arrogance, my ignorance, my competitiveness, those mental processes, when they occur in my mind, they also directly result in dissatisfactoriness. The mind of anger, the mind of attachment, jealousy, all these types of mental states are also subjecting me to dissatisfactoriness, to suffering. So to understand that, the truth of cause, what is it that causes my problems in life, my lack of happiness, my sense of loss, my sense of attachment, all these types of things. Where does that come from? So, for us here tonight, for me as well, I'm no different to sitting here. We both have the same problems. So tonight I was trying to think, how can I broach this subject of having confidence in this process, to have confidence in this process of sitting here and learning to meditate and trying to reflect on my life, to reflect on your life, to reflect on your mental process. And so last week I gave the example of, trying to understand the self-cherishing mind. So just bringing up this apparent contradiction. I have an innate wish to be happy, right? I want to be happy. I want to be free from suffering. Okay? And like His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, every living being has the right to be happy and the right to be free from suffering. That's a right from existence, from mere existence. There is a right to be happy and to be free from suffering. And I want happiness and I want to be free from suffering. But, the bizarre sort of problem is that my wanting to be happy and my wanting to be free from suffering is itself the cause of so much of my suffering and so much of my unhappiness. That the actual wanting, the grasping at my own happiness and the grasping at my own being free from suffering becomes actually the cause of my suffering and the cause of my unhappiness. And so why is that? And we can actually see that let's say in the actions of a child, I want the chocolate, I want the chocolate, and the screaming and then the disturbance and the frustration and the disaster of not being satisfied from the wanting of the lolly or the chocolate or the wanting of something. And so the wanting itself can become the cause of suffering. But, so this is the sort of contradiction that appears to us, is that if we say that wanting happiness and wanting to be free from suffering is our innate wish, and the right to have happiness and the right to have freedom from suffering is also an innate right. So you can see that there's this sort of apparent contradiction. All right, so what is it that goes wrong? Is the wanting happiness and wanting to be free from suffering, is that itself the problem? And I think ultimately that possibly is the problem. The actual I want happiness. That the I, that sort of feeling of I want, that ultimately probably that is the problem. But for us to understand that is really a big stretch. So we can talk about the self-cherishing attitude, which is an attitude towards myself that I am here, one person. I'm here, one person. the rest of humanity is here. And when it comes to who gets happiness, I get happiness. Well, they can look after themselves. You know, like we have that sort of, that individuality, that individual attitude. And it seems to fit in with this idea of my innate right to be happy and to be free from suffering. But if we start to examine it, and the example I gave was the idea of driving and, you know, close to here, making a right-hand turn, and there's a green arrow that comes, and so I'm sitting in the vehicle waiting for the thing. So even approaching the intersection, I'm already have some anxiety about which lane I need to be in and which is the fastest, you know. So again, it's a manifestation of my grasping at having to get the better, the best opportunity in front of me. So I make a decision as to what lane I'm in, and then I may have some anxiety that I got in the wrong lane. And so there's a sense of dissatisfaction from that thought. And then I'm impatient, waiting on the lights to change. And then the lights change, and I'm sort of aggressively, get moving, you know, this, you know, like you can see all of these things play out in our actions. Get moving, the people in front, come on, get moving, you know, again, an aggressive manifestation of that thought. And, you know, and this is the end of North Road, for those who know it, sometimes the person in the left lane, you know, you can turn from the left lane as well as the right lane. That person's turning left and they have to stop. They have to stop and let a pedestrian go, and so you feel that immediate frustration that you chose the wrong lane. The person is blocking you, they're dawdling, they're not on the ball, they're looking at their phone, or there's all these things that can go on. And so there's this resentment of them, you know, there's this huge play of different scenarios. And then they get out of the way and you plant the foot and you zoom off, and there's the exhilaration of having made it, you know, and then a sense of pride, you know, how good am I? I got through, the light was still yellow, you know, there's all these things that go on. But you can see there's this incredible play of emotion that can occur, micro emotions. We may not be in touch with them, but if we look for them, we can see that these things are all there. And then if we actually look for them and then dwell on the experience of each one of those, you can see that each one of those experiences is dissatisfactory. It's not happiness. There's an agitation and a disturbance about every one of these little micro emotions. You know, the anxiety of not getting across the intersection, the aggression towards somebody who's blocking your way, the you know, even this exhilaration of getting through and you know, sort of turning. It's an agitated experience, and then looking in the mirror and seeing that, you know, the person that was in the lane next to you not getting across, and then feeling exhilarated that you got across and they didn't get across. So that competitive rejoicing, again, is in its essence, when we look at the experience, we see that it's an agitated experience. Okay, so this fine examination of our emotional experience, we can see that it's pretty much unsatisfactory all the time. So I would like us to sort of think that the truth of suffering is not just aging and sickness and death. You know, it's not just people falling out of an aeroplane window or, you know, being shot by shot by a sniper from a kilometre away, or somebody bombing your apartment. That is suffering. But so also is this micro suffering from our delusions, our thinking, creating a general dissatisfactoriness in our mind. And so I don't know, look, I guess I'm trying to indicate that the Dharma practice is something that can occur with us on this micro level of moment-to-moment satisfaction and the moment-to-moment understanding of the play of our delusions in creating this momentary dissatisfaction. And then thinking about how can I from a moment-to-moment basis have happiness? What is it that I need to do on a moment-to-moment basis to be able to have some mental peace and happiness? And I think for most of us, or for probably all of us, this problem is invisible to us because we just think life is life and that this is just part of life. And so I think for most of us, then our whole life is just lived. It's lived without recognising this problem. So the truth, that's why the truth of suffering is invisible to us as ordinary beings, and it's only visible to somebody who has this highly realised state. And so for me, I can see why the Buddha sat for 6 weeks thinking nobody would believe him, because it's this issue of the micro problem, the micro problem of moment-to-moment dissatisfactoriness caused by our mental delusions. And for us, it's invisible. We just take it that is life. And so we have this minute-to-minute micro dissatisfactoriness. And what happens then is that I go around and around in a circle on this miniature scale of micro emotion, let's call it, until I explode with the rage and anger. And then I think, where did that come from? How come I suddenly was so angry, or how come I am suddenly so lustful and distracted and obsessed with this person or this situation or that, purchasing this or trying to achieve this or that. And so we get shocked. We get shocked by the large scale emotions. We get shocked by the large scale anger and attachment and hatred because we have missed this micro emotion. And so for me, the last couple of years, trying to understand the, in Buddhism they say, that even the tiniest negativity should not be ignored. But the reality is that we think the only things that are really negative are like the large scale, the big things like, stealing lots of money or something like that. But all these little things, which are also a type of theft or something, and lying, a whole lot of deception and lying, doesn't matter. That's all small stuff. It's only when you're lying at a high level that's really lying. The rest of it is just normal life. So we tend to have somehow thought that all of this micro level stuff is insignificant. But I think the truth is that it should be the other way around, that we have to look after the micro stuff. We have to look after the micro moment-to-moment stuff, and then the bigger stuff will sort of look after itself. But, it's sort of like we've got things around back to front. Anyway, I'm sort of rambling a bit tonight, but I just wanted to explore these thoughts with you, that to comprehend that the level of unsatisfactoriness that we experience is really down to this moment-to-moment situation, and it's affected by primarily my delusions, my prejudices, my micro-anger, my micro-pride, my micro-jealousy, my micro-attachment, my micro-ignorance, on a very momentary level. And that creates this just constant stream of dissatisfactoriness. And so then thinking that somehow that coming to the Buddhist temple is a pathway to overcome that, well, I guess this is where I'm thinking, well, how do we have confidence in that? How do we have some trust or faith that this is a pathway to help us? And I think, that's part of my thinking in the last few years. Where is it that I have confidence in that pathway? To engage, and trust the idea that for multiple years I need to apply myself, and that then there'll be some benefit. How do I get that trust? That so in the prayer I go for refuge. Which means that I placed my trust and hope. I place my trust, my hope, my aspiration for the future, my wish to overcome the dissatisfactoriness. I place that hope in the Buddha, in the Dharma, the teachings, and in the community of realised practitioners. So that idea of refuge, how do I generate that sense of being able to place my hope and trust in these solutions, in this as a solution to the truth of suffering, which I can barely see anyway. So I just find this thought quite challenging, and challenging to try to share that thought with you. Like thinking, how is it that I can share this sort of, I don't know if conundrum is the right term, but this sort of inbuilt contradiction of I want to be happy and I want to be free from suffering, but I am embedded into this problem of dissatisfactoriness so deeply that I can't see it. So, I think I've probably rambled a bit too much tonight, but anyway, that's what I've been trying to communicate, this sort of contradiction that we are faced with, and our difficulty in seeing the problem. What is the problem with life? And so the Four Noble Truths, the first teaching that the Buddha gave, is trying to address this issue of this is the problem, and this is the picture of the problem that we all face. So let's do a little bit of meditation. So the meditation can help give us some clarity of thinking and some mental focus, some mental power. So meditation can increase our mental power, that we're able to become more self-aware and more able to decipher this the truth of suffering. So adopt a good posture, which mainly here means keeping your back straight. It can be beneficial to the right hand on the left hand and touching the tips of your thumbs to your navel. Also, they say if you sit cross-legged, to actually have your legs pulled back into your groin, to sort of have them come back. So all of these things, are to help. Good physical posture helps good mental state. Become aware of where your mind is, what your mind is thinking about, and just bring that awareness right inside your body, inside yourself, inside your body, and let all of the different thoughts drop away, and then keep doing that until you get to a point of no thought, and then turn your attention to the breath, the mere coming and going of the breath, like the awareness of the breath. Just coming in and going out, and then focus on that 100%. So you can just relax your mind a little bit from that meditation. So now we can try a different type of meditation. So in line with what I've been talking about, so here just let your mind roll from one moment to the next moment. We're just going to let the mind roll on from one moment to the next moment. And, without thinking to focus on anything particular, but just let your mind roll on one moment to the next moment. But with part of your mind, just observe, what delusion or what thinking is taking place. Is there something appearing, and is there some reaction to it? What's my micro emotion that's happening, and what is my micro experience as the mind rolls from one moment to the next moment. So without letting your mind particularly engage in anything, but just let your mind move from one moment to the next moment, and try to observe the role of any micro emotion or micro delusion, prejudice. Observe your mind in the process of just thinking, moving from one moment to the next moment. And then just bring your concentration back to the room. I'm interested to hear if anybody had something they'd like to share about that meditation. Yeah. But do you accept that your mind is going from one moment to another moment? Yeah. Yeah, look, I think the language of how to describe what to do here is difficult, I think that's one of the things, so for me, you'd hear a noise and there'd be a thought associated with the noise, or and then I was trying to look for myself. I heard a noise outside, so there was some reaction to that noise, and so I tried to see. I could see there was a tiny bit of anxiety or something, disturbing, with not being able to identify the noise, and so then something else comes. And so your mind is just our mind is moving from moment to moment all the time. So here we're trying to just watch that. So when we meditate on the breathing, we're trying to lock our concentration onto that one thing. Here we weren't locking the mind into anything. We're letting it free. We're letting the mind free. So, okay, let's do it again for just a minute, and think. I'm just letting the mind run free, but I'm trying to observe that. I'm trying to observe the process of my mind running free. Not to engage with the thoughts, yeah. In the breathing meditation, the only thought you're engaging with is the breath. And now? We'll engage with that thought? We're letting the thoughts arise, and we're trying to see the role, or what is happening in terms of this, say, the micro emotion or the micro experience, but we're not deliberately building on a fantasy associated. Like if there's a sound, you don't particularly follow the engagement in trying to identify or picture, you know. I mean, we're blessed here at the moment that it's so quiet. You know, it's beautifully quiet tonight. But if there was cars going down the street, you might think, is that a V8 or is that somebody's driving fast? And so you create a fantasy about somebody's driving too fast. Where are they going? Who could it be? You know, this sort of embellishment of the experience. Okay, so let's try the meditation again, and we are just. The mind will move from moment to moment. We're trying to see the role of the micro emotion, micro experience. Anyway, let's just try it again. And just relax your mind. Look, I'm not saying it's easy, and I must say myself, I'm looking at it, and, you know, the difficulty is actually getting caught up in your thinking, you know, which is then problematic in itself, because you've got this whole story, fantasy sort of is created. But even like trying to resist that, the mind doesn't rest. This is one of our problems. The mind doesn't rest. It's always doing something. It's got to have an object, and it's there. And then there's all this technical explanation about what's going on, but basically we can see that there's this whole sort of rolling thought. The thought is rolling around, changing but not changing, and then suddenly very different, and then associated with it is all this micro-emotion. So this is the whole mind and mental factors thing that's going on all the time with us. And so we're trying to have a look at that. Like, it's not easy. It's not easy to look. And it's not easy to understand what we're looking at. But to try to have some looking, have some sort of experience of looking at that mind. So what is it that you see when you do that? What do you experience? Like, is it just...
So the thoughts that come to mind, there's not necessarily a slight noise that happens over here, but the experiences that I think goes to go. So
okay.
The great search, something else.
Yeah. So recollections. You were dominated by recollections. Okay, well, that's, yeah. You know, the thoughts I were going through my mind is, have I stuffed up by this sort of loose form rambling? So each of us will have something particular to, it's interesting that your thing is recollecting. Yeah. Speak up a bit, I can't quite hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna have a question. Like, everyone, I think the consensus of the idea is that it's just bound to get easier when you meditate. But what about when it goes in that direction of it getting harder or more complex as you go?
So the question is about the progression of meditation. Different meditations do different things. So the breathing falls into the category of a concentration meditation, where we have one object. We have one object, the breath, or the awareness of the breath. So technically, what we try to focus on is the awareness of the breath. Not so much the physical sensation, but the mental awareness of the breath is ideally the object that we try to isolate. And we 100% try to have that fully occupying my mind, right? So that my mind is totally absorbed into the breath. To the point where we can have an experience where the breath and the mind thinking, focusing on the breath, appear to be just one thing, like just the breath. Totally engulfs my mind, the breath. That oneness of the subject and the object. The subject, me, the mental meditator, and the object, the breath. It ends up being just like one thing, the breath. Totally occupying your mind. So that's sort of an aspect of good concentration. But here we are focusing, we're not focusing, we're looking. We're looking at the mind, just moving from one moment to the next moment and trying to learn what is happening in that movement of the mind and what is my experience. So one is that we can see that the object of my mind keeps changing all the time, but simultaneous with that is the associated micro-emotion that I'm feeling in regard to each of those changing moments of mind. So if in the case of recollecting something from the day, let's say it's like a movie playing out in your mind, but as each moment of that recollection plays out, my micro-emotion or my, the mental factor, my mental experience, moment to moment, is also changing. And so trying to observe that process.
Yeah, so my question is, what do you do if you become so honest with yourself that you're almost like wincing at the experience? Like, my question is, how do you get through, or do you have any advice on getting through it? Not like the thing happening itself, but like the feelings of like, I just want to tap out right now because it's actually easier not to meditate than to meditate.
So you're talking about like a recollection where you start to feel some shame or guilt or...
You're so in the now that you can, I don't know, sometimes maybe just feel trauma coming up, sometimes maybe it's not super like clear, but it's you being super present, so you can't deny it.
Yeah, well, look, let's say say you are recollecting something that is traumatic. It may be best to not recollect that or not dwell on it if there's something that comes up. I don't think that's what you're saying, but just as a general advice that, I don't want people going away thinking they have to recollect the most traumatic thing in their life and analyse it to death. We don't want to, that we may not be capable of doing that, or it may not be beneficial to do that. So like in the thought I had about, tonight, I could see there was some, let's call it anxiety, or maybe some guilt or something coming. It's beneficial to recognise that emotion, that micro-emotion, and the particular thing I'm looking for here is beneficial to understand that it's unsatisfactory. That there's an element of suffering in it.
But if it becomes like overwhelming, where you're feeling it so because you're in the meditation, you're so present with it that it becomes
Well, people experience that in their daily life when they recollect their trauma and they find it overwhelmingly damaging to recollect it. So we can have a similar experience in our meditation, and probably the advice is for you at the moment to not do that. You know, there's no point unless you're able to gain some realization from it, or some let's call it healing. Let's say, unless you can gain some healing or wisdom or something from it, then best not to do that. You know, not to engage in that. But if in this process we will experience shame, we will experience, you know, aspects of guilt or aspects of, deep regret. Yeah, you might recognise things that you've done in your past. When you look at them, when you finally look at them, you can develop great regret. That can be a positive. That's a real, so can be a real positive.
Yeah, that's like once you've gone through it. I think what I'm kind of thinking of is, I think there can be a lot of expectations on meditation, and because of that, you can easily get hung up on yourself. Does that make sense?
Well, I think you'll experience that when you actually, you can have all the expectations you like about meditation, but when you actually sit and meditate, you realise many of those grand expectations are not easily fulfilled, because meditation is difficult. And like that meditation, I think that meditation we all attempted to do there, we all could see it's extremely difficult. Like we're meditating, trying to meditate on our mental experience, and it's actually really difficult. Like we don't really have the tools to do that easily, but we can start. We can start from here, looking at that, and then you think, well, what am I looking at? I've just got all these thoughts going on, But it's a process where we have to sort of try to understand the way our mind works. And so I guess that's what I was inviting you to do, is to try to look at the way your mind works, the way the mind rolls from one moment to the next moment, and associated with that is this whole collection of self-judgments, micro-emotions, pleasant, unpleasant, guilt, regret, denial, like everything. And to see that process. Yeah.
So Damien, when we have these micro emotions and things like that, and we're aware of them, does that mean that the negativities will go away if we are aware of them, or is it purely a matter of just being aware of those?
So the question is about whether those, if let's say we're talking about an unpleasant micro emotion, the micro emotion, this, to some degree, the mere fact we're looking at it can make things subdue themselves a bit, but not necessarily. Not necessarily. So the process, the end goal is that the destructive micro emotion arises. I see that. I then apply a beneficial micro-emotion antidote to that destructive micro-emotion. To be able to do that, I have to recognise the problem, know the antidote, and apply the antidote, and engage my mind in the antidote. So we talk about, mindfulness. Like mindfulness is the ability for your mind to basically keep the link between one moment and the next moment. So it's technically like a memory. It's maintaining the memory from one moment to the next moment and not losing the object of focus. right? Then there's the mental factor of alertness or introspection. And that is another part of the mind that recognises that I'm meditating on the breath from here to here and here, and mindfulness is holding the breath from one moment to the next moment. But alertness is another part of the mind that's identifying that I haven't lost the object. You know, it's sort of like a bit of a watching thing. So they then encourage us to adopt a third factor, which is called conscientiousness. And so conscientiousness is a mind which maintains an attitude of love and compassion in every moment. And so in that meditation where we're just looking at the mind, you know, going from moment to moment, and whether we're recollecting something or whether we're thinking about tomorrow or whether we're you know, fantasizing in this moment, you know, whatever it is. So mindfulness is keeping the awareness of that, keeping that thing going, let's say. Alertness is having an active watcher. Okay. We can also have conscientiousness in that in whatever thought comes up, I always have an attitude of love and compassion engaged. Okay, so for us, what happens is we have a recollection, and the recollection itself generates my micro-emotion with some sort of process. There's some process, and so I feel angry. You know, like something, I remember something that happened today, I sort of hear the words again or something, or I hear the circumstance, and so I automatically generate an anger in due to that recollection. So if we're able to apply this quality of conscientiousness, then the anger cannot arise because love and compassion is already present. And that acts as the antidote. That acts as the antidote to prevent anger arising. Because anger is not compatible, the mind of anger is not compatible with the mind of love and compassion in my mind at the same time. They're not compatible, so they cannot coexist. And so that quality of conscientiousness is really something to strive for, where you maintain the mind of love and compassion in every single moment. And as we can see, that's not readily accessible to us. So, you know. Yeah.
Just relating on what you said earlier about the sort of carousel of the mindful expressions, no matter how small it can be, whether you're at a light or something, there's that carousel, there's pride getting to the light, and ego, and at one end of the spectrum, I guess when you start off, you dwell on those things, and no matter how small they are, you might carry them to a point where you have a larger, blow up from anger, habitually practicing these unsatisfactory things. And something I find myself often doing when I have those unsatisfactory things is I'll apply humour to that, so it becomes more of a less unsatisfactory thing, and I can sort of apply a humorous state to looking at that unsatisfactory thing. And now instead of dwelling on it, it's more of I'm sort of, I guess, meaning it for myself sort of thing. I'm just wondering if Dharma has anything to say, because I often am in the sort of two minds of is this an elevated way to, I guess, relate to my unsatisfactory behaviour in that instance, or is it just a way of me self-justifying that unsatisfactory thing? Because you start off, I guess, with having an unsatisfactory thing and dwelling on it, and obviously you want to reach to the point where you're free of that, and the unsatisfactory nature never really comes in. But is there room in the middle for, I guess, using things like humour to relate to those things, and whether it's jealousy or
look, I'm not quite sure if I'm fully on board with your question, but I would say that any technique that you're using to help you understand the circumstance, I think in general is possibly beneficial, but you, like you say, the self-justification aspect, where you modify your apprehension of the reality in it. Let's say you call it a humorous way, but the humorous way is actually allowing you to have been very negative in the circumstance and not really carry the consequences of that, or something like that. You know, that you're diminishing the consequences through this so-called process of humour, or you know. So yeah, you do have to be a little bit careful about. You know, like the comedians say, "Oh, it was just a joke. I was just joking. It was just for the sake of a laugh," you know. But the reality is that it was actually abusive, or it was really abusive, and so you know, and this is partly what the whole political correctness language sort of debate that's going on about in the society at the moment is that. You know, there is a negativity involved in a lot of what we say and do, and you know, it's difficult for us sometimes to see that negativity, but I think on reflection you can see that there is there's a problem there, and. You know, I was talking to somebody about this today. So the negativity of harsh speech, which particularly refers to swearing. So that the use of swear words, that the reason a swear word is a swear word is because the mere hearing of the word itself in that context, because not, you know, a word might be a swear word in one context, but in another context it's a technical term or something. But the swear word in the thing that by its very nature, it's disturbing. By its nature, the swear word is disturbing by its nature, and so the high prevalence of swearing becomes like you think, oh, it's acceptable, it's the norm, or it's the thing, you know, but. From the Buddhist point of view is that despite that prevalence, the disturbing nature of the word does not go away because of the meme or the acceptance or the, you know, people say it's the culture. You know, it's the culture that people talk like this. But the disturbance is still there. So it doesn't go away, you know. So you have to be careful about your own sense of justification and sort of explaining away your behaviour with using, you know, like cultural terms or meme or something, you know, like sort of trying to make something acceptable, which in essence is actually not acceptable or not something like that. You know, there's a bit of a trap, you know, with. Yeah, and I think, like in particular, I think one aspect which is quite disturbing is the gender demeaning that occurs in a lot of the, you know, music, you know, the rap and all that. That the gender demeaning, you know, oh, it's just the sort of trying to say it's just the culture or the thing or the this or that, but the demeaning aspect is not diminished just because it's everywhere, you know, or you know, so I think that's something to be sort of a bit more sensitive to, you know, whether it's like racial profiling, stereotyping, that whole thing. I think is it's got a pervasive damage that is very difficult to really see, but it is still there. Okay, it's quite late. Sorry. Yeah, look, I have been sort of moving around the topic a lot tonight. I wanted, because it's Easter Monday, it's a difficult night for people to come to, and so I did take the opportunity to try to express my thinking a bit. So if I need to be excused for that, please excuse me. But anyway, it's good for the people everybody contributing to the discussion. It's really useful. So let's just dedicate. We think we're going to dedicate the benefit of us coming together and, share that benefit to everyone. So just imagine maybe it comes in the form of light, fills your body, and you radiate out that benefit to everyone. So just think about offering or giving it away to everyone, the benefit. Right, thank you. And so I'll be back next week, and I'll try to be a little bit more structured next week. But thank you. Yeah.